My identity and my freedoms changed quite dramatically on the 10th of December in 1998, when I received a phone call. After 39 years of working in South Africa, I was told that if my family and I valued our lives, we should leave the country right now. I'd been working for the Independent Mediation Services of South Africa for and on behalf of the city of Cape Town, and by quiet request from a man I admired more than any other, Nelson Mandela. The Commission's work was to investigate the causes and identify the perpetrators of ongoing violence in 2 of the city's Cape Town townships. Mandela was both a rebel and revolutionary. His Xhosa birthright name, Loroli Hlahla, literally means he who will shake the tree. He was a rebel in that his use of the armed struggle in enforcing change in apartheid South Africa earned him a 27-year prison term. But he's much better known for the leadership of his people away from vengeance after suppression, oppression, and repression, a much easier thing to do, toward reconciliation. And it was his singular focus and his absolute clarity in the bringing down of the apartheid regime that taught me the courage to face the truth, no matter what the cost. So on that day, reporting into the city of Cape Town, on behalf of the Commission, 3 of the perpetrators who the Commission had identified were sitting in those council chambers. And clearly, they didn't like the message they were hearing, and that put us on a number of different hit lists, and it turned us into migrants almost instantaneously. Today, all over the world, as we speak, there are migrant refugees fleeing political and religious turmoil. And we treat them with our separationist and our nationalist policies quite cruelly. We fear that they'll steal our jobs. We fear that they'll overrun the country with their religious fervor. We fear that their values are so different and their numbers are so huge that they'll swallow up our culture in one big gulp. But the reality is quite different. Here's a fact. All of the people who've arrived on Australian shores to date would not even fill the MCG. Fact, we're a micronation. There are cities in China, Japan, Southeast Asia, Mexico, all with population counts far greater than our national head count. So the facts belie the truth. On a global scale, there are 6.5 so-called illegal, so-called unregistered Mexican migrant workers working in Southern California, providing more food to America than any other state in that nation. And they're all doing the work that Americans have refused to do before. So these facts, born out of fears of possibility rather than probability, really deserve no place in our future build of a new age country. In the work, and if that's the case, we shouldn't be throwing stones at those who find themselves in boats all over the world trying to find shores on which to beach their crumpled lives. In my work that I do today, working with leadership teams, trying to help them deepen their dialogue and to build relationships of trust based on truth, I am becoming more excited about the fact that we do, in fact, have the leadership capacity and we do have the leadership mettle. We certainly have the moral imperative, but much more excitingly, we have a historical model on which to build a future. In 1948, 3 short years after the end of the Second World War, the Snowy River Mountains Project recruited 100,000 workers, 2/3 of which were migrant workers from 32 countries across war-torn Europe. They came to start a new life, but most importantly, if we look back in history, they became part of what was to become Australia's proudest economic, proudest engineering, proudest environmental, and proudest social economic feats of all time in history. Amongst them were two German chaps. One went by the name of Karl Rick, he was a carpenter, and the other a fellow Hein Bergenhausen, who was an ex-Luftwaffe pilot but also an engineer. Imagine what life for them would have been like coming into an Australia where families had lost husbands and fathers and brothers and uncles and sons in that very bitter conflict. It would have been an atmosphere and an environment ripe for vengeance and for vilification. Add to that, life high up in the Snowy River Mountains in a tented camp in sub-zero temperatures, having left your family behind in Europe as you came to start this new life. It would have been isolating, desolate, lonely, and totally not dissimilar to what our current refugees would be feeling today. But funnily enough, when people look back, the 60,000, two-thirds majority who've stayed in Australia, they look back at it and they think, it was a happy time. Unbelievable. Why? Because they were part of something that was great. They were part of something that was going to become amazing in Australian history. They were contributing, they were respected, they were brought into the community, they were included, and above all, they were given hope. Imagine a world today, if we embraced more people like Karl and Hein, where we could build a future based on hope, which had an economic and an environmental slant, which was sustainable. Now, it really was an incredible feat. The plan was to divert 3 major rivers into, not only for agricultural irrigation, but also for the generation of clean energy and electrical power. It took 26 years to complete. It was on time, on budget, and it has provided post-war sustainable employment. It continues to do so. It has a legacy today. We're about to put another 5,000 jobs into the same project, so it continues to build and it continues to grow. It is an incredible feat, but most importantly, it's an social engineering prototype of warmth, inclusivity, generosity of spirit, and openness in society. So, what have we learned from our past, and what are the congruencies across the globe today? Well, as I said, we've got governments who are committing suicide every 2, 3, or 4 years. We've got politicians from different, but not so different political parties who publicly and personally sledge each other on a public forum, who stand for little other than the next elections, whilst they watch polls on judging on how popular they are with the electorate, who actually, by the way, is incredibly alienated and a bit bored. So if we let these politicians continue on and we remain in an apathetic fog, so to speak, we're going to continue to get increasing polarization in our governments and in our communities. We're going to look and see increasing separation and rise of racism again in our societies. We're going to see a lack of focus on good social policy, which helps to build nations and grow nations in incredibly exciting ways and rich ways. We're going to see a continuing decline in our taxpayer base and a growing economic debt. It isn't a recipe for success. It isn't a recipe for building a nation of the future. It is a recipe for disaster, and it's not what we need to leave as a legacy for our children. So what do we need to do? We need rebels and revolutionaries. We need rebels who will stand up against the tide, who will hold the walls, push the moral boundaries and the social norms out into an open society that engages people, that brings people in, that is inclusive, generous, which gives people jobs, those people who want jobs, who will take those jobs and work hard for a future of hope. If we do that, then we're talking about embracing inclusivity, we're talking about embracing diversity, we're talking about embracing migrant refugees. Now, if you really think about it, 1 in 4 of us today in this room were born overseas. If we trace our histories and our pathways through our origins, most of us, other than the original landowners in this land, are migrants. So we need to recognize what it is that we have done and put, and these people in the Snowy River Mountains project made an indelible and undeniable mark on our cultural mix. Think great coffee, think great food. We didn't get that from our Anglo-Saxon forefathers. Now, one of my favorite quotes from Mandela: "For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that it respects and enhances the freedoms of others." And you might add that respects and enhances the environment. Barack Obama, who was inspired by Nelson Mandela, noted in his parting shot from Washington at the end of last year, he said, "It is the corrosive voices of leadership today that are turning people of good character away from public service." So our rebels and our revolutionaries, who we're asking to stand up and take the mantle of leadership, of good moral character, who will recall and rebuild a much prouder history in our nation, we need to look back on today, which will be our future history, and we'll need to look back and say, we did the right thing? Absolutely. Tom Little, who was a Snowy River Mountains foreman at the time, reflected back on his time on the project and said, "I had 4 years in the Australian Army. I could have hated those German chaps just as much as anybody, but I couldn't see the sense in it. The war was over. We had a job to do, and they were there to kick off and start a new life. So let's do it."